The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I knew it was trouble the moment I saw the return address from Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I had just gotten home from the county fire station, where I served as fire marshal for Jefferson County, Virginia, still wearing my uniform when I tore open the envelope. Inside was a formal notice of violation and a fine for $800. The reason: illegal burning of leaves on my property during high fire risk season. I read it 3 times, each time feeling a mix of disbelief and amusement growing in my chest. The thing was, I had personally issued myself the burn permit. I had inspected my own property according to county code, ensured all safety measures were in place, and filed the proper paperwork with my office. Everything was documented, time-stamped, and completely legal under Virginia state law and county ordinances. But apparently, someone in the HOA had decided that their rules superseded actual fire code. I walked into my house and set the letter on my kitchen counter. My wife Sarah was making dinner, and she glanced over at me with a knowing look. "Let me guess," she said, stirring something on the stove. "Another love letter from our friendly neighborhood HOA. You could say that," I replied, loosening my tie. "Apparently, I'm a dangerous criminal for burning those leaves last weekend." Sarah turned around, wooden spoon in hand. "The ones you spent 3 hours carefully monitoring with a water hose and fire extinguisher next to you. Those leaves, the very same." She shook her head and turned back to dinner. "Barbara's at it again. Barbara Patterson." The name alone was enough to make most residents of Meadowbrook Estates cringe. She was a 52-year-old woman with an asymmetrical blonde haircut that somehow looked like it cost $300 but still screamed, "Let me speak to your manager." She had moved into the neighborhood about 2 years ago and immediately ran for HOA president. To everyone's surprise, she won, mostly because nobody else wanted to deal with the headache of organizing neighborhood cleanup days and arguing about fence colors. But Barbara had turned the position into something resembling a military dictatorship. She prowled the streets in her white Lexus SUV, looking for violations. She measured grass heights with a ruler. She carried a color chart to make sure everyone's home paint matched the approved palette. She had fined my neighbor Tom 3 times for parking his work truck in his own driveway, because it was commercial, even though it was just a regular pickup with his plumbing company's logo on the side. I picked up the letter again and reread the specific language. It cited Section 14 of the HOA Covenant, which prohibited open burning of any materials during the months of September through November without express written permission from the board. The problem was twofold. First, the county's legal burn season was specifically October through February, when the fire danger was actually at its lowest in our region. Second, my burn permit from the county, signed by me in my official capacity, legally overrode any HOA covenant according to Virginia state law. HOA rules could not be more restrictive than county ordinances when it came to fire safety. That was established case law going back decades. I decided to handle this the professional way first. I sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out my laptop, and drafted a formal response to the HOA. I attached a copy of my burn permit, a copy of the county ordinance, a reference to the relevant state statute, and a brief but polite explanation that their fine was invalid and would not be paid. I hit send and figured that would be the end of it. I was very, very wrong. 3 days later, I got a response from Barbara herself. The email was written in all capital letters, which should have been my first warning sign. "Mr. Blake Nielsen," it began, "your so-called permit does not exempt you from HOA rules." All residents must follow our covenants regardless of their employment. The fine stands and has now increased to $1,000 due to your refusal to comply. Payment is due within 14 days, or we will place a lien on your property." I read the email twice, then called my buddy Marcus at the county attorney's office. Marcus had been the county's legal counsel for 15 years and had dealt with his share of overzealous HOAs. "Marcus, it's Blake," I said when he picked up. "I need some advice on something ridiculous." "Is it Barbara Patterson ridiculous?" he asked immediately. "How did you know?" "Blake, her HOA has generated more legal inquiries in the past year than every other HOA in the county combined. What did she do this time?" I explained the situation. Marcus listened, and I could hear him typing on his keyboard as I talked. "Okay," he said when I finished. "So here's the deal. She's wrong, obviously. State law is crystal clear on this, but you know how HOAs work. They'll threaten, they'll bluster, and they might actually try to follow through with a lien. If they do, you'll have to take them to court to get it removed, and even though you'll win, it's still a pain in the rear. So what do you recommend? Honestly, show up to their next board meeting. Make it official. Bring documentation. Put it on record that you're operating under a valid county permit and that their fine is legally invalid. If they still push it after that, we can send them a formal letter from the county attorney's office explaining why they're opening themselves up to a lawsuit." That sounded reasonable. I checked the HOA's website and found that their next meeting was in 4 days, Thursday evening at 7, held at Barbara's house, because of course it was. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October. I put on my full Fire Marshal uniform, gathered all my documentation into a folder, and drove the 3 blocks to Barbara's house. Her home was a massive colonial-style building, easily the largest in the neighborhood, with white columns and a circular driveway. Several cars were already parked outside. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Barbara answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting right there. She looked me up and down, taking in the uniform with obvious displeasure. "Mr. Nielsen," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "How nice of you to join us, though I must say, wearing your uniform to intimidate the board is rather unprofessional." "I came straight from work," I replied, which was true. "I'm here to address the fine you issued me." "That matter is not on tonight's agenda." "Then I'd like to add it under new business," her lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll see if there's time. You can wait in the living room." She stepped aside and I entered. The living room was decorated like a furniture showroom, all matching colors and perfect arrangements that looked like nobody actually lived there. 4 other people sat on various couches and chairs. I recognized 2 of them, Linda Chen and Robert Morrison, both longtime residents. The other 2 I didn't know. "Hey, Blake," Robert said, nodding at me. "Hear you're in trouble with the law," he grinned as he said it. Something like that. Barbara swept past me and took her seat at the head of the group, sitting in what could only be described as a throne-like armchair. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel on a side table. The first 20 minutes were mind-numbingly boring. They discussed the budget for next year's landscaping, debated whether to increase dues by $5 or $10, and argued about what color the neighborhood entrance sign should be repainted. Finally, Barbara moved to new business. "Before we adjourn," she said, "Mr. Nielsen has requested to speak about his recent violation." I stood up, folder in hand. "Thank you. As you know, I received a fine for burning leaves on my property on October 12th. I'm here to formally contest that fine and provide documentation showing that my burn was legal and properly permitted." I handed out copies of my burn permit to each board member. As you can see, I obtained a county burn permit prior to the burn date. I conducted the burn according to all county regulations and fire codes. Under Virginia state law, specifically Section 15.2-914, county fire ordinances take precedence over HOA covenants in matters of fire safety and prevention. Linda looked over the documents with interest. Robert was nodding. The other two board members whose names I didn't know seemed confused but willing to listen. Barbara, however, waved her copy dismissively. This is irrelevant. Our covenants are binding contracts that all residents sign when they purchase property here. You agreed to follow our rules. HOA rules can't override state law, I said calmly. And they certainly can't override county fire codes. My burn was conducted safely and legally. The fine is invalid. The fine stands, Barbara said firmly. This board has the authority to enforce our covenants, and we will do so. If you refuse to pay, we will proceed with collection actions. Linda raised her hand. Barbara, I think we should consider what Blake is saying. If state law contradicts our rules, we might not have the legal authority to fine him. We absolutely have that authority, Barbara snapped. The covenants are clear. Actually, I said, if you attempt to collect on an invalid fine, you're opening the HOA up to legal liability. I've consulted with the county attorney's office, and they've confirmed my position. I'm trying to resolve this reasonably before it becomes a bigger issue. Barbara stood up, her face flushing red. Are you threatening this board, Mr. Nielsen? I'm informing you of the law. There's a difference. You think because you're fire marshal you can do whatever you want and intimidate people with your position. I think because I'm fire marshal, I know fire code better than anyone else in this room, and I'm telling you that my burn was legal. If anyone else in this neighborhood wants to burn leaves, I'll issue them the same permit as long as they meet the safety requirements. Absolutely not. Barbara's voice rose. We will not have people setting fires all over this neighborhood. It's dangerous, it's unsightly, and it's against our rules. Robert cleared his throat. Barbara, maybe we should table this and get legal advice before we proceed. We don't need legal advice. The covenants speak for themselves. I could see this was going nowhere. Fine. I've made my position clear and provided documentation. I will not be paying this fine. If you want to pursue legal action, that's your choice, but I'm confident any judge will rule in my favor. I turned to leave, but Barbara's voice stopped me. Mr. Nielsen, you're not excused. This meeting isn't adjourned. I looked back at her. I'm a resident, not a board member. I'm free to leave whenever I want. Her face went even redder. If you walk out that door, I'll consider it contempt of this board and fine you another $500. You can't fine someone for leaving a meeting, I said, genuinely amazed now. That's not how any of this works. I walked out, hearing Barbara's angry voice behind me demanding that the fine be added to my account. I got in my truck and drove home, fairly certain that this situation was about to get much worse before it got better. I was right. The next morning, I woke up to find a new letter taped to my front door. It informed me that I now owed $1,500 in fines, and that the HOA had scheduled a hearing for the following week to consider additional penalties, including possible forced removal of my fire hazard materials, meaning the small pile of branches I had stacked next to my shed for future disposal. I took a picture of the letter and texted it to Marcus. He called me back within 5 minutes. Blake, this is harassment at this point, he said. She can't fine you for leaving a meeting. She definitely can't threaten to come onto your property and remove things. I'm going to draft a formal letter from the county attorney's office. How long will that take? I can have it done by Monday. We'll send it certified mail to the HOA and to Barbara personally. Thanks, Marcus, I appreciate it. No problem, and Blake, document everything. Every letter, every interaction, every communication. If this goes to court, you'll want a complete record. I spent that weekend being hyper-aware of any time I saw Barbara's white Lexus cruising through the neighborhood. On Saturday afternoon, I caught her driving past my house 3 times in an hour, slowing down each time to look at my property. The third time, she actually stopped and took pictures with her phone. I walked out to the curb. "Can I help you with something, Barbara?" She jumped, clearly not expecting me to come out. "I'm documenting ongoing violations." "What violations?" "Your grass is 0.7 inches over the maximum allowed height." I looked at my lawn. I had mowed it 3 days ago. The covenant says grass can't exceed 4 inches. My grass is maybe 2.5 inches tall. I have my measurements. She held up a ruler. "Then your ruler is broken, or you don't know how to use it." Her face pinched up. "I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Nielsen. And I don't appreciate being harassed on my own property. You've driven past my house 3 times in an hour taking pictures. That's stalking. I'm performing my duties as HOA president. Your duties don't include harassing residents who have filed legitimate disputes against your fines." She climbed back into her Lexus. "You'll be hearing from the board." She drove off with more speed than was appropriate for a residential street. Sunday was quiet, which made me nervous. In my experience with difficult people, quiet usually meant they were planning something. Monday morning, Marcus called me. Letters drafted and sent. I also included a section about harassment and documented your concerns about her repeated surveillance of your property. If she's smart, she'll back down. And if she's not, then she'll escalate, and we'll end up in civil court where she'll lose badly and probably cost the HOA a lot of money in legal fees. Monday evening, I was doing paperwork at the fire station when I got a call from Sarah. "Blake, you need to come home right now," she said, and I could hear the anger in her voice. "What's wrong?" "Barbara is here, with a landscaping crew. They're trying to remove the branches by your shed." I was in my truck and driving before she finished the sentence. My house was only 10 minutes from the station, and I made it in 7. When I pulled into my driveway, I found exactly what Sarah had described. A pickup truck with a trailer was parked on the street, and 2 men in work clothes were in my backyard. Barbara stood on my lawn, directing them. Sarah was on the front porch, arms crossed, looking furious. I got out of my truck and walked straight to Barbara. "What do you think you're doing?" "Removing fire hazards from the property, as authorized by the HOA Covenant Section 22, which allows the board to remediate dangerous conditions. Get off my property, now. These men are simply doing their job." I raised my voice. "I'm the fire marshal." "Those branches are not a fire hazard. They're stacked appropriately and are scheduled for disposal, and you have no legal authority to enter my property without my permission." One of the workers walked over, looking uncomfortable. "Hey man, we don't want any trouble." "The lady said she had authority to hire us for this job." "She lied to you," I said. "This is private property and you're trespassing." The worker looked at Barbara. "Madam, if he's saying we don't have permission." "I'm the HOA president. I have full authority." "No, you don't," I said firmly. HOA authority doesn't extend to entering private property without permission. That's trespassing, and if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." The worker held up his hands. "We're out. This isn't worth it." He called to his partner, and they both headed for their truck. Barbara's face was turning purple now. "You can't do this. I hired them. Then you can pay them for their time, but they're not touching my property." The landscaping truck drove away. Barbara stood on my lawn, practically shaking with rage. "You think you're so special. You think your little uniform gives you the right to ignore the rules everyone else has to follow. I follow the rules, I said, keeping my voice level. Real rules. Laws. The problem is you think HOA covenants give you unlimited power and they don't. Now get off my property. I'll have you removed from this neighborhood. On what grounds? I haven't violated any actual laws. You, on the other hand, just committed trespassing and attempted theft of property. So I'd suggest you leave before I do call the police. She stomped to her Lexus and peeled out down the street. Sarah came down from the porch and stood next to me. That woman is unhinged, she said. Yeah, I'm starting to think this is more than just a power trip. She's got some kind of personal vendetta going now. I called Marcus again and told him what happened. His response was immediate and serious. Blake, file a police report. Right now. Even if nothing comes of it, you need this documented. She just trespassed on your property and attempted to have your belongings removed without authority. That's a crime. I drove to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and filed a formal report. The deputy who took my statement knew me from various fire and safety trainings we had done together. Man, HOA drama is the worst, he said, typing up my report. We get calls about this stuff all the time. Most of it's just neighbor disputes, but this sounds like it's escalating. That's what I'm worried about. Well, you've got it documented now. If she comes back onto your property without permission, call 911 immediately. We'll have someone out there. The next few days were tense. I kept waiting for the next shoe to drop, but everything was quiet, too quiet. Then on Thursday, I got a call at work from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Blake Nielsen? A woman's voice, professional and polite. Yes, who's calling? This is Jennifer from the Jefferson County Attorney's Office. I'm calling about a complaint that was filed against you regarding unauthorized burns in a residential area. Do you have a few minutes to discuss this? My stomach dropped. A complaint? From whom? I'm not at liberty to say, but the complainant alleges that you've been conducting unauthorized burns and using your position as fire marshal to circumvent HOA rules. That's completely false, I said. I have proper permits for every burn I've conducted. I can provide all the documentation. We'd appreciate that. The complaint also suggests that there might be a conflict of interest in you issuing permits to yourself. And there it was. Barbara had gone over my head and filed a complaint with the county, trying to make it look like I was abusing my position. It was clever, I had to admit. If she could get the county to investigate me, she might be able to cause enough trouble to force me to back down. I'd be happy to meet with you and provide all relevant documentation, I said. I can also explain the procedure for self-issued permits. It's all completely above board and follows established protocol. We scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. I spent the weekend preparing a comprehensive packet of information. Every permit I had ever issued to myself, including ones for minor burns in previous years. Documentation showing that self-issued permits were common practice and included additional oversight to prevent conflicts of interest. Letters from my supervisor confirming that my procedures were appropriate and followed department policy. Monday's meeting at the county attorney's office lasted 2 hours. Jennifer turned out to be Jennifer Walsh from their civil division, a sharp woman in her 40s who listened carefully as I walked through everything. Mr. Nielsen, she said when I finished, I appreciate your thoroughness. Between you and me, we suspected this was a nuisance complaint, but we have to investigate everything that comes in. From what you've shown me, there's clearly no wrongdoing here. Your procedures are appropriate, your documentation is excellent, and frankly, the idea that you'd risk your career and liability over burning some leaves is absurd. So the complaint is dismissed. The complaint is dismissed. However, I do want to give you some advice. This HOA president, Barbara Patterson, has been a recurring problem. We've had multiple complaints about her from various residents, and she's filed numerous frivolous complaints with various county offices. She's building a pattern of harassment. What can I do about it? Document everything, which you're already doing. If she continues to escalate, you might consider a restraining order. And if the HOA tries to follow through on those fines or place a lien on your property, come to us immediately. We can provide a letter clarifying the county's position, and if necessary, file an amicus brief if it goes to court. I left the meeting feeling vindicated but also exhausted. This whole situation had taken up so much time and mental energy over something that should have been simple. I just wanted to burn some leaves in my own yard. That evening, I got home to find another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that due to my continued defiance of board authority and my threatening behavior toward Barbara, I was being fined an additional $2,000 and was forbidden from speaking at any future HOA meetings. I took a picture of the letter and sent it to Marcus, then called him. "This is harassment," he said immediately. "Clear, documented harassment. Blake, I think it's time to go on the offensive. The county is prepared to send a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA. We'll make it clear that they're violating state law, that their fines are invalid, and that any further action will result in legal consequences." "Do it," I said. "I'm done being nice about this." The letter went out on Tuesday. By Thursday, I got a call from Robert Morrison, one of the other HOA board members. "Blake, can we talk?" he asked. "Off the record." "Sure, what's up?" Half the board wants Barbara out. "This thing with you, the letter from the county, it's making everyone realize how out of control she's gotten. We're calling a special meeting to vote on removing her as president." "How's that going to go?" 3-2 in favor, probably. Linda and I are definitely voting yes. Mark Williams will vote with us. Deborah Saunders will vote no because she and Barbara are friends. And Barbara will obviously vote no. That's 3-2 then. Right. But here's the thing. Barbara knows it's coming. She's been calling an emergency meeting of all residents to try to rally support and paint you as the villain. She's telling people you're a bully who's using your position to intimidate the HOA. You have got to be kidding me. I wish I was. The meeting's Saturday morning at 10 at the community center. I think you should come. Will I even be allowed to speak? I'll make sure you are. People need to hear your side of this. Saturday morning was cold and rainy, appropriate weather for what I expected to be an unpleasant meeting. Sarah came with me for moral support. When we arrived at the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance, the parking lot was nearly full. Apparently, Barbara had done a good job of stirring up interest. Inside, about 50 residents were gathered, sitting in folding chairs facing a table at the front where Barbara and the other board members sat. Barbara saw me enter, and her expression hardened. The meeting was called to order, and Barbara immediately launched into what could only be described as a tirade. According to her version of events, I was a dangerous rule breaker who thought the law didn't apply to me. I was setting illegal fires that risked burning down the neighborhood. I was using my position as fire marshal to threaten and intimidate people. I had trespassed at her home during a board meeting and made threatening statements. The list went on. I sat there listening, forcing myself to stay calm. Several residents were nodding along, buying into her narrative. Others looked skeptical. When Barbara finally finished, Robert raised his hand. "I think Blake should have a chance to respond to these allegations." "He was banned from speaking at HOA functions," Barbara said sharply. "This is a community meeting, not a board meeting," Linda added. He has every right to speak. Barbara looked like she wanted to argue, but the murmurs from the crowd suggested people wanted to hear from me. She gave a tight nod. 5 minutes, no more. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I had my folder of documentation with me, but I decided to start with something simpler. "How many of you know what I do for a living?" I asked. Several hands went up, but many people looked uncertain. "I'm the Fire Marshal for Jefferson County." That means I'm responsible for fire safety, fire code enforcement, and fire prevention throughout the entire county. I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've investigated hundreds of fires. I've written thousands of permits and conducted thousands of inspections. Fire safety is literally my job and my expertise. I opened my folder and held up the burn permit. This is the permit I issued for my leaf burn on October 12th. It includes a site inspection, weather conditions assessment, safety equipment verification, and notification to surrounding residents. The burn was conducted during approved hours under appropriate conditions with proper safety measures in place. It was completely legal and safe. I pulled out another document. This is a letter from the Jefferson County Attorney's Office confirming that county fire ordinances supersede HOA covenants under Virginia state law. HOA rules cannot be more restrictive than county fire codes. The fine I received is legally invalid. I looked around the room. People were paying attention now. I'm not trying to be above the rules. I'm trying to follow the actual law. Barbara has decided that her interpretation of the HOA covenant is more important than state law and county ordinances. That's not how any of this works. Barbara stood up. "You're cherry-picking the facts. You've been defiant and threatening from the very beginning." "I've been trying to resolve this reasonably. I provided documentation proving the fine was invalid. Instead of acknowledging the mistake, you increased the fine. Then you fined me for leaving a meeting. Then you trespassed on my property with a landscaping crew and tried to remove my belongings without permission. That's documented in a police report, by the way." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people turned to look at Barbara with surprise. "That's a mischaracterization," Barbara said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "I was acting under HOA authority to remediate a dangerous condition. You had no authority to enter my property, and the branches weren't dangerous. You know what was dangerous? Hiring workers to go onto someone's property without their permission. That's trespassing and attempted theft. If I wasn't trying to resolve this peacefully, you'd be facing criminal charges right now." The room had gone very quiet. Linda Chen stood up. "I think everyone here needs to know that Barbara filed a complaint with the county attorney's office trying to claim Blake was abusing his position. That complaint was investigated and dismissed. The county found no wrongdoing." "Is that true?" someone from the crowd asked. Barbara's face was red. "I was acting in the best interest of the community." "You were harassing a resident who dared to push back against your overreach," Roberts said firmly. "And it's not just Blake. We've had numerous complaints from other residents about excessive fines, unreasonable demands, and what honestly amounts to bullying." Tom, my neighbor with the plumbing company truck, stood up from the back of the room. "She fined me $900 for parking my work truck in my own driveway, my truck that I use to earn a living and support my family." A woman I didn't know raised her hand. "She threatened to fine me because my daughter drew a hopscotch grid on our driveway with chalk." Another voice. "She told me I couldn't have a vegetable garden in my backyard because it was unsightly." The floodgates had opened. Person after person stood up with stories of Barbara's ridiculous fines, nitpicking enforcement, and aggressive attitude. I realized that I wasn't the first person she'd targeted. just the first one who had the expertise and resources to fight back effectively. Barbara tried to regain control. These covenants exist for a reason. They protect our property values and maintain the quality of our neighborhood. They're supposed to do that, Linda said. But you've twisted them into tools for harassment. You're costing this HOA money in legal fees and wasted time. And now you've brought down official scrutiny from the county attorney's office. That's not protecting anyone. Robert stood up. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Barbara Patterson as HOA president. You can't do that here, Barbara said quickly. That requires a board meeting. Actually, Linda said, pulling out a copy of the HOA bylaws. Any vote of no confidence can be initiated by a petition of 25% of residents, or by a 2/3 vote of the board at any official HOA function. This is an official HOA function, and we have a quorum of board members present. I vote in favor of the no confidence motion, Robert said. As do I, Linda added. Mark Williams, who had been quiet until now, raised his hand. I vote in favor. That was 3 out of 5 board members, more than enough. Barbara looked stunned, then furious. This is a coup, she said. You can't just remove me because you don't like how I do things. We're removing you because you've exceeded your authority, harassed residents, and exposed the HOA to legal liability, Linda said calmly. The vote stands. You're no longer president. Barbara grabbed her papers and her purse. Fine. You'll all regret this when property values plummet and this neighborhood turns into a slum. She stormed out of the community center. After a moment of stunned silence, several people started clapping. The applause spread through the room. Robert took over running the meeting. They quickly voted Linda in as the new president. Her first act was to make a motion to void all fines issued in the past 6 months and have them reviewed by a committee for validity. The motion passed unanimously. After the meeting ended, several neighbors came up to thank me for standing up to Barbara. Tom shook my hand. Man, I wish I'd had the guts to fight back like you did. I just paid my fines because I didn't know what else to do. You should be able to get those refunded, I told him. Keep an eye on the HOA communications. Sarah and I drove home feeling like a weight had been lifted. It seemed like the situation was finally resolved. Barbara was out, the fines were being voided, and sanity was being restored to the HOA. But I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Monday morning, I got a call from Marcus. Blake, we have a problem. What now? Barbara filed a lawsuit. Against you personally, not the HOA. She's claiming defamation, harassment, and abuse of power. She's suing for $50,000 in damages. I felt my blood pressure spike. She's suing me. After everything she did, it's a slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. She's trying to punish you for fighting back and maybe scare you into settling. The good news is that Virginia has anti-slap protections. We can probably get this dismissed pretty quickly, but you're going to need a lawyer. I ended up hiring an attorney, Daniel Foster, who specialized in civil litigation. He reviewed all my documentation and was confident we could get the case dismissed. This is textbook slap, he said. She has no legitimate claim. You made truthful statements about documented events. You didn't defame her, and you certainly didn't harass her. If anything, it was the other way around. We'll file a motion to dismiss under Virginia's anti-slap statute, and will also counterclaim for malicious prosecution and abuse of process. The legal process moved slowly. Months passed. Barbara's lawsuit alleged all sorts of things that simply weren't true. She claimed I had threatened her, stalked her, used my position to intimidate her, and made false statements to destroy her reputation. Each allegation was easily disproven by my documentation and witness testimony. Meanwhile, life in Meadowbrook Estates improved dramatically. Linda Chen proved to be a reasonable and fair HOA president. She reduced the fine schedule to something more sensible, focused on actual issues like common area maintenance rather than nitpicking individual homeowners, and generally treated people like adults. Several residents who had been considering moving decided to stay. In January, we had our hearing on the motion to dismiss. Daniel presented our case efficiently. He showed the judge the timeline of events, the documentation proving Barbara's overreach, the police report about her trespassing, and the county attorney's dismissal of her complaint against me. Barbara's attorney tried to argue that I had orchestrated a campaign against his client and damaged her reputation. The judge didn't buy it. Mr. Nielsen documented legitimate concerns about HOA overreach and responded to baseless fines and harassment, the judge said. Miss Patterson was removed from her position by a vote of the HOA board and residents, not by any action of Mr. Nielsen. Her reputation was damaged by her own conduct. Motion to dismiss is granted. But Daniel wasn't done. Your Honor, we'd like to proceed with our counterclaim. Over the next few weeks, Daniel built a case showing a pattern of harassment by Barbara. The multiple fines, the trespassing, the false complaint to the county, and finally, the frivolous lawsuit. He argued that she had acted maliciously to punish me for exercising my legal rights. In March, we were back in court. This time, several of my neighbors testified about their experiences with Barbara. Tom talked about the excessive fines. Linda testified about Barbara's refusal to acknowledge when she was wrong. Robert described how Barbara had tried to spend HOA money on her personal attorney to fight me before the board voted her out. The evidence was overwhelming. Barbara's attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated community volunteer who had been unfairly targeted, but the facts didn't support that narrative. The judge ruled in our favor and awarded me $15,000 in damages for the stress, legal fees, and time wasted dealing with Barbara's harassment and frivolous lawsuit. He also issued a permanent injunction prohibiting Barbara from filing any further legal action against me without first obtaining permission from the court and showing probable cause. After the ruling, Daniel and I stood outside the courthouse. "This should be the end of it," he said. "If she's smart, she'll cut her losses and move on. And if she's not smart, then she'll violate the injunction and end up in contempt of court. But I don't think it'll come to that. She just got hit with a judgment she probably can't afford. That tends to make people reevaluate their choices." I didn't see much of Barbara after that. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had put her house up for sale. In May, a moving truck appeared in her driveway. By June, new neighbors had moved in, a young couple with a toddler who seemed friendly and normal. The lawsuit had one unexpected benefit. The publicity around the case. Several news outlets picked it up as a human interest story about HOA overreach, led to renewed interest in HOA reform at the state level. A state legislator from nearby Charlottesville introduced a bill to clarify the limits of HOA authority and strengthen protections for homeowners. It passed in the next legislative session. Life gradually returned to normal. I continued my work as fire marshal, issuing permits and conducting inspections. In the fall, when October rolled around again, I burned another pile of leaves. This time, I notified the new HOA board first, even though I didn't have to. Linda emailed back within an hour. "Thanks for the heads up, Blake. Burned safely." Tom came over while I was monitoring the fire, beer in hand. "Remember last year when this whole thing started?" he asked. How could I forget? You know what the funny thing is? If Barbara had just accepted that you had a legal permit and backed down, none of the rest of it would have happened. She'd probably still be HOA president. Some people can't stand being told they're wrong, I said. They'd rather burn everything down than admit they made a mistake. Tom laughed. Speaking of burning things down, you need another log on that fire. Sarah came out with refreshments, and we ended up having an impromptu backyard gathering. Several neighbors stopped by, drawn by the friendly fire and the smell of smoke. We roasted marshmallows and told stories as the sun set. It struck me that this was what neighborhoods were supposed to be. People getting along, respecting each other's rights, following reasonable rules while also understanding that a little flexibility and common sense went a long way. The irony was that Barbara's crusade to maintain a perfect neighborhood had nearly destroyed its sense of community. It was only after she left that people felt comfortable being themselves again. The judgment I had won against Barbara remained unpaid for months. Daniel filed for collection, and eventually we received a settlement from her homeowner's insurance, minus the deductible she had to pay. I used part of the money to make a donation to the local volunteer fire department and put the rest toward a college fund for our daughter. In November, the new state law regarding HOA limitations went into effect. It explicitly stated that HOAs could not impose restrictions stricter than county or municipal ordinances on matters of public safety, including fire codes. It also created a streamlined process for homeowners to challenge improper fines and established penalties for HOA board members who knowingly imposed invalid fines or exceeded their authority. I was invited to speak at a county meeting about the new law and how it would affect HOA governance. Several HOA presidents attended, including Linda. After my presentation, one of them asked a question. How do we balance maintaining community standards with respecting individual rights, common sense, and humility? I said. Remember that HOAs exist to serve residents, not to control them. Focus on things that genuinely affect the community, like common area maintenance and clear safety issues. Don't sweat the small stuff. And when someone points out that you're wrong about something, have the grace to admit it and correct course. The audience applauded, and several people came up afterward to share their own HOA horror stories. It seemed like Barbara wasn't an isolated case. There were petty tyrants in neighborhoods across the county, maybe across the country, who had forgotten that HOA board membership was supposed to be about service, not power. That December, Meadowbrook Estates held its annual holiday party. Under Barbara's presidency, it had been a stiff, formal affair with strict rules about behavior and dress code. Linda transformed it into a casual potluck at the community center, with kids running around and people actually enjoying themselves. I brought my famous chili, which I made every year. Sarah made her chocolate chip cookies. We mingled with neighbors, many of whom I hadn't really talked to before because the neighborhood had felt so tense under Barbara's rule. As I was getting a drink, Robert Morrison came over. "Hey, Blake, I wanted to thank you again for standing up to Barbara. I should have done it sooner, but I just didn't want the confrontation." "Don't beat yourself up about it," I said. "These situations are hard. Nobody wants to be the troublemaker in their own neighborhood. Still, you did the right thing, and it made all of us braver. We've had more community engagement in the past 6 months than in the previous 2 years combined." That was true. The neighborhood email list, which had been mostly Barbara's violation notices, was now full of people organizing playdates, advertising yard sales, recommending local businesses, and generally acting like neighbors. The change was remarkable. As the party wound down and Sarah and I walked home under the December stars, she squeezed my hand. "This turned out okay," she said. "Better than okay," I agreed. "Though I could have done without the months of stress and legal fees." Was it worth it? I thought about that. The harassment, the lawsuit, the time and energy spent fighting something that should never have been a fight in the first place. But I also thought about Tom getting his money back, about the other neighbors who were no longer living under Barbara's thumb, about the state law that would protect countless other homeowners from similar situations. "Yeah," I said, "it was worth it." The following spring, I was up for reappointment as Fire Marshal. The county supervisor's meeting where the vote took place was usually a formality, but this time the room was surprisingly full. Several of my neighbors had shown up to speak in favor of my reappointment. Tom spoke about how I had helped him understand his rights when dealing with the HOA. Linda talked about my professionalism and dedication to fire safety. Even some residents from other neighborhoods in the county spoke up, talking about how the HOA reform had helped their communities. The vote was unanimous. Afterward, the chairman of the Board of Supervisors shook my hand. "That was quite a situation you dealt with last year," he said. "You handled it well. You stood up for what was right without abusing your position. That's the kind of integrity we need in county officials." I appreciated the recognition, but honestly, I was just glad the whole thing was over. I could get back to focusing on my job, my family, and enjoying my home without someone measuring my grass with a ruler or documenting every leaf on my lawn. The pile of branches by my shed was finally disposed of in April. I rented a chipper and turned them into mulch for Sarah's flower garden. No fires this time, no drama. Just a quiet weekend of yard work with my wife, exactly the kind of peaceful suburban life I had always wanted. In May, a for sale sign went up on Tom's property. I was worried he might be leaving because of lingering issues from the Barbara situation, but when I asked him about it, he laughed. "No, nothing like that," he said. "I got a great job opportunity in Richmond." I'm actually sad to leave now that the neighborhood's so much better. If this had happened 2 years ago, I'd have been thrilled to get out of here. That seemed to sum it all up. A neighborhood that people had wanted to escape from was now a place they wanted to stay. That change, more than any legal victory or vindication, felt like the real win. Tom's house sold quickly to a family with 3 kids, who immediately became fixtures at the neighborhood playground. The community continued to thrive under Linda's reasonable leadership. She served 1 year as president, then stepped down and let someone else take a turn, the way it was supposed to work. As for me, I kept doing my job, issuing permits, conducting inspections, educating people about fire safety. And yes, when fall came around again, I burned my leaves. With a proper permit, following all safety regulations, just like I'd been doing all along. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation, about how one unreasonable person can poison an entire community, and about how much better things can be when people choose cooperation over control. Sometimes I think about Barbara and wonder if she learned anything from what happened. Probably not. People like that rarely do. They move on to the next place, the next organization, the next opportunity to exert power over others. But at least in Meadowbrook Estates, her reign of terror was over. The injunction remained in place, a permanent reminder that actions have consequences. My neighbors still talked about the great HOA war at parties, usually with a mix of amusement and relief that it was behind us. New residents heard the stories and appreciated the reasonable community they were joining. And every October, when the leaves started falling and the smell of wood smoke filled the air, I smiled a little as I filed my burn permit. Because I could. Because it was legal. Because I had stood up for that right and won. That's the thing about bullies, whether they're in a schoolyard or running a homeowners association. They count on people being too tired, too intimidated, or too busy to fight back. When someone finally does stand up to them, when someone has the knowledge, resources, and determination to push back, the bully's power evaporates. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted to burn some leaves in my own yard. But sometimes standing up for something small is how you protect something big. In this case, the right of homeowners to use their own property without unreasonable interference, and the principle that voluntary associations can't override the law just because they feel like it. Years from now, when people ask me about my career as fire marshal, I'll probably talk about the big investigations, the lives saved, the policies improved. But I'll also remember the fall when I had to fight my own HOA just to do something completely legal and safe. And I'll remember how a whole community came together once the person dividing it was removed. That's the real story. Not one man against an HOA, but a community finding its voice and reclaiming its right to be reasonable, friendly, and free from petty tyranny. The fact that I was fire marshal just meant I had the expertise to know I was right and the resources to prove it. Any of my neighbors could have been in that position if they'd been targeted for something within their area of expertise. The lesson wasn't that you need special knowledge or authority to stand up to an abusive HOA. The lesson was that you need to know your rights, document everything, and refuse to be intimidated by people who think a title gives them unlimited power. And maybe, just maybe, the lesson was also to choose your battles. If Barbara had picked a fight over my grass being slightly too long, I probably would have just mowed it and moved on. But fire safety, that was literally my profession, my expertise, and my responsibility. She picked the wrong fight with the wrong person. As I sat on my back porch that evening, watching the sun set over Meadowbrook Estates, I felt grateful. Grateful for my family, my job, my home, and my community. Grateful that justice had prevailed, that reasonable people had stood up against unreasonable rules, and that I lived in a country where the law protected individual rights even against the collective will of a homeowners association. The pile of leaves in my yard would burn next weekend. Safely, legally, and without drama, just the way it should be.